Hello everyone, this is Ron Harama, and today I'm here to talk to you a bit about Spark, my new mobile app for what I'm calling specification and audiation and real-time composition. So I just want to say a little bit about what that means, how this app came about and where it's headed. I thought I'd start just by doing a bit of definition of terms. Specification maybe doesn't need to be defined, but I will give a formal definition here. The act of identifying something precisely, stating a precise requirement. This is something that we do often in algorithmic composition, or in programming in general, which is to make a specification for something to occur, of course. Audiation might be a slightly less familiar term. It probably sounds familiar, but the precise meaning might be a bit fuzzy. It actually comes from the Gordon Institute, which was established by Edwin Gordon. They have a particular approach toward music learning, and they say it takes place when we hear and comprehend music, for which the sound is no longer or may never have been present. In other words, this is about hearing in your head. It's about oral fantasy, oral imagination. So if we look at these two things together and think about how they relate to the whole process of making music, we see that specification, you may or may not be able to, or I may or may not be able to know in advance what something is going to sound like if I make a specification for something to happen. Audiation is maybe a bit more clear if it's hearing in my head, but in the absence of actually transcribing it or realizing it, it still has a degree of immateriality and unknownness. So it's something, both of these things, they have to be made material in order to really experience them. So why did I decide to create the app? Well, I've been doing this business of specification and audiation via a number of different platforms, but especially I've been using for over 20 years now Paul Berg's AC Toolbox software, algorithmic composition software. It's a Lisp-based software, and this is an example of what it looks like. This is from my piece Changing Weights 2000. There's a link there. I'll put this PDF up. You can download it and chase up these links if you'd like. So you see the code on the left. This is kind of a typical approach for a Lisp-based code. It's quite economical in a way. Everything is in parentheses. These days it's referred to as functional code. So you see the functions to the left, and then we have the lists preceded with the tick mark. So I've been working with this approach to making music using lists of values for quite a long time. This is what the interface looks like. If you want to do things a bit more graphically, I suppose what's maybe sort of key at this point are these three fields of rhythm, pitch, and velocity, which are the three fields I decided to integrate into my app. And one of my reasons for making the app is the fact that this software, AC Toolbox, is no longer under development, and it's 32-bit software, and Paul has decided not to migrate it to 64-bit. He retired a few years ago, and it's just something he's not going to do. So to some extent, what I'm doing is bringing forward some of the functionality that I've always enjoyed working with this software. You see it also has some graphic tools there on the right, and I would at some point like to integrate some graphic tools in my software as well. So I also have experience as a mobile app developer. I've made a couple of generative audiovisual apps. The most recent one is Infinity. That was 2017. I decided way back in 2012 to become an iOS developer. That's when I released my first generative audiovisual app called Dancing Wu Wei. And more recently, I have been performing as a live coder using tidal cycles. And tidal cycles is also another functional approach, and it suits me in the sense that it's like AC Toolbox, extremely economical, and it involves working with lists and functions, and of course lots of parentheses like any good functional language. And more recently, after my years of experience and working on various platforms as a programmer and creative coder, I had developed a desire to perhaps develop an efficient cross-platform audiovisual mobile app development pipeline. So I wanted really to have some templates that I could build on when I wanted to make new software. So I spent a couple months recently working with a student programmer named Kieran Hart. And we first worked with React Native because I found the React Native environment really excellent for building interfaces quickly and good-looking interfaces. And so we did a little project with tone.js and felt that probably it wasn't going to be the best thing in the long run. So then we did something with AudioKit on iOS. It was actually quite a different project from what I have developed currently with Spark. It was just sort of a blank canvas that you could touch and would record whatever you were doing. And that worked quite well, actually. But it did have the problem of not being cross-platform. AudioKit is a nice environment, but it's not cross-platform. And so we decided to work with Juice, or I decided to work with Juice, which is C++, very highly developed and fairly well supported audio and graphic UI environment for developing cross-platform apps, both mobile apps and desktop apps. And so Spark, the current version of it, was made with Juice, and Juice has proved to be a really excellent tool for doing this. I've been impressed with it so far. And this is what Spark looks like. If you've watched any of the videos, you've already seen this. If you haven't, then you're seeing it for the first time. So you see I have these three fields that I mentioned a few minutes ago, which is pitch, dynamics, and rhythm. And it's list-based, as you can see. I've entered some values already here. And you have the option to go back and forth between the MIDI notation, which I'm very accustomed to using. I've been working with MIDI notation since the late 80s and use it in AC Toolbox. I like the numeric approach to working with pitch and dynamics. And also you see rhythm there is based on, in this version of the app, just ratios, basically. Ratios as related to the beat. But if you want to work with more traditional notation, especially in the realm of pitch and rhythm, you can do that. You can toggle the boxes, and then you get the traditional notation for pitch and also for rhythm. The dynamics in this case is based on 100, a value of 100. It's a bit arbitrary, but it seemed logical. You'll see that also when you make these tick these boxes, it changes the values of you've already entered into the fields below. You see there's also a BPM controller there. It goes from about 40 to 240, something like that. So we've got the play buttons, the clear clears everything in that field, and the step back, if you want to step back, just one, the last thing you've entered, and there's a loop button next to the play button. So what are sort of the principles I'm thinking of or have been thinking of in developing it in this way? One of them is what I call composing in a continuum, which is something I learned back in the late 90s from a composer named Julio Estrada. Mexican composer who I met at the Xenakis Studios in 1998. Also, Gerard Pape, who runs that studio, has written about this concept. And it basically refers to thinking about each parameter, pitch, dynamics, rhythm, and others as well, of course. Timbre is an obvious one, as individual continua. Each one of us has its own continua, and you can specify each of these separately. And Julio actually did it in terms of graphic curves, but it could be also just thought of in terms of specific values or specific data points. Related to this is the concept of phase shift. If you're thinking of these parameters as separate entities, then it almost becomes automatic that there is some degree of phase shift. If they're looping and they're of different lengths, there will be phase shift. And this is a procedure kind of associated most prominently, I guess, with Steve Reich, the minimalist. And it's something I've always enjoyed working with and have used in various ways and on various levels. And as I've also referred to, I like the idea of list programming. It's quite simple conceptually, just working with lists. And related to title, as I mentioned, doing real-time composition or improvisation has appealed to me for a long time, and title kind of finally made it possible for me. I often found when working with AC Toolbox, because it was just basically working with text, that it was so fast that it was almost real-time, and I just kept wanting to work in an environment that was real-time and could be used for improvisation, either on stage, so to speak, or in the studio. So yeah, that's related to live coding, and that involves what I spoke of initially, this combined process of audiation and specification. So when I do live coding, I usually begin by audiating, in other words, listening in my head to what it is I want to hear, and then specifying that. Usually it matches most of the time, because I've been kind of doing this for a while. Not always, and that's actually part of the interest of the process, is encountering those times when it doesn't match. So when the specification gives me surprises, and then I have the opportunity to work with those surprises and to audiate further, and there's this kind of feedback loop between audiation and specification. And I also have to mention deep listening, because I have studied deep listening for quite a long time, basically since around 2009 or maybe 2007 was when I first met Pauline Oliveros. Eventually I became certified in deep listening. So listening is just a real key to what I do with live coding especially, and just with musical composition in general. And so what have the results been? Well, so far it's produced a quite robust cross-platform app. The performance of it is very reliable so far, and it can manage pretty intense loads right now. I've been impressed. It's at the moment a car+strong algorithm for a physical modeled string sound. And so the footprint of the app is very small. It's being computed on the fly, synthesized on the fly, and that has worked out quite well. So yeah, it has engendered very engaging music making so far. You can listen to the videos I've put up so far in the playlist. Again, that link is here on this page, the PubPub page. And some of those videos show sort of the real-time process of composition. The current constraints, which is that it's currently a monophonic instrument and it's a monotimbral instrument, I have found actually to be nice limitations. So it forces me into a particular mode of working, which is a list-based mode, where I'm just adding and subtracting as kind of an additive approach. And I have found this to be an enjoyable way of doing real-time composition. So what are the plans for the app? Well, I just got some further funding for this from my university, Bath Spa, and so I'm going to spend a couple more months soon developing it with Kieran Hart again, the programmer. And so first thing I want to do is to integrate recording into the app. I would ideally like to include Bluetooth MIDI transmissions so I can use it to drive other instruments remote. I'm still torn about whether I'll include more timbres, maybe one or two more, and maybe some controls for refining this timbre, controlling the level of reverb and perhaps the envelope, some envelope control. We'll see how that works out. I would like to stick with the physically modeled approach. I would like to include a few tools for capturing patterns so that it becomes maybe a bit less tedious in terms of entering things that I recognize as patterns and to capture them and to loop patterns. I'd also like to integrate some stochastic techniques, some probability functions, some random functions. That's what I've done a lot of work with that in AC Toolbox. And also maybe some graphic techniques in terms of drawing curves that could be, these could be masks that work very well in AC Toolbox again. Sort of random selection within picture dynamic masks. But at the same time, I'd like to avoid feature creep. I don't want it to become an all-purpose application which tries to do everything that I want an app to do. So that it becomes too cluttered. So that's my brief intro to Spark. Thanks very much for listening, and please do give a listen to the demo videos that are up there on YouTube if you haven't yet. Thanks.